Hey, this is Johnny C. with the Horror Channel, and we are here with Phil Schoenberg, and he runs the Ghosts of New York tours. We're here at the St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, and tell us a little bit about the tours and what you have to offer.
We offer several major tours of ghostly neighborhoods. We do Edgar Allan Poe and his ghostly neighbors of Greenwich Village. We do from Ghostbusters to John Lennon, the Ghost of Upper West Side. We do the Ghost of Times Square. We do the Ghost of Grand Central. And of course we do Peter Stuyvesant and his ghostly friends of the East Village. And tonight we're going to cover, he's the oldest ghost in New York. And we're going to wind up eventually toasting a ghost here or two, like Harry Houdini at McSorley's Ale House. We'll go to the Astor Library, where there's some interesting, entertaining ghosts. We're going to hear about the 5 loneliest ghosts in New York, the sisters that live at the old the sisters that live at the Merchant House, or did live there at one point, and then we're going to wind up with a murder and with Edgar Allan Poe.
Behind me is Andy Sedor, and what is your specialty on the tour?
Well, I've been doing mostly the tours in the village, both this Peter Stuyvesant tour in the East Village and Edgar Allan Poe in the West.
And we'll see some of that tonight.
Yes.
Okay, great. And over here we have Gordon Linsner, correct?
Thank you. Yes.
And you cover mostly?
I do this tour. I do the West Village tour. I've done Ghosts of the City, the Downtown tour, and various other locations, and many other tours as well.
Okay, well, we're going to start here and give us a taste of what's going on.
So we're going to first learn a little bit about Peter Stuyvesant, probably we're going to learn about Peter Stuyvesant, one of the most active ghosts in New York, and the oldest ghost. So walk with me right over there. We're standing in front of the mausoleum, not a gravesite, mausoleum of Peter Stuyvesant, and a mausoleum has the graves of many other people. In this instance, there's about the graves of about 40 members of the Stuyvesant family, another 40 graves, or I should say caskets, of slaves that worked on his plantation, because most of the East Village at one point was his farm. And when he was forced out as the last Dutch ruler of New Netherland, and this became the colony of New York, he had given himself a very golden parachute, the best half square mile on Manhattan Island to farm. And over the years, his descendants became very rich because eventually they changed from becoming farmers into landlords. So that became a very profitable way of making money. They were always the wealthiest and next to wealthiest family in New York. Now, Peter Stuyvesant died at the ripe old age of 80 in 1672, and at that point he was noted for causing some disturbances at his mansion, which was about a block away from here. He was into what you call the Three Stooges type of humor, because he liked to have the pottery and crockery break, and he especially liked to do this when the servants were going up and down the staircases to scare them, and you would hear the pottery and crockery breaking. Unfortunately, his plantation burned down in 1744. Let me start again. Unfortunately, his mansion burned down in 1744, and people noticed that here was what appeared to be a shadow of some kind, a ghostly figure of some kind in Dutch period costume, and with a peg leg. He had lost one of his legs fighting the Spanish in the West Indies. So that was kind of like his trademark. He was also known as Old Silvernails, or Peg Leg Pete. Well, he started doing his haunting over here, and what happened was, this originally had been his private chapel, but his descendants had donated the land to create St. Mark's in the Bowery Episcopal Church. And in life, he didn't like anybody to be a different religion except his, so he's kind of disturbed that his grandchildren became good Episcopalians, and he's been haunting furiously ever since. And over the years, there's been many interesting stories. For example, when he pushed through 2nd Avenue around 1831, his grave was his mausoleum was starting to be disturbed, so he tried to come up and scare the servants. He tried to come and scare the workmen who stood their ground. And in 1900, when they expanded Second Avenue, again he came out, and again he tried to scare the workers, but they continued stood their ground. And they knew it was...
In what manner would he scare them?
He fly up, he throw his hands about, and you could hear sometimes... That was that was his trademark noise, you know he would be present. And he was especially vigorous on April 14th, 1865. When you see this bell over there, that is actually the bell of this church, but this church has had so many fires that the bell tower can no longer support that bell. But in 1865, that bell began to ring furiously. And the sexton of the church came out to investigate, and he saw a shadowy figure, Dutch period costume, peg leg, disappearing around the corner. And the next night, the same thing happened. Again, they thought they chased a shadowy figure. And this time, they saw a rope on the gravesite, or I should say the Muslim over here. And when it made the bell, the ringing of the bell so amazing was the rope to the bell tower had been cut mysteriously weeks before, so there was no apparent human agency that could explain why this was happening. Now, why was this event taking place? Well, on April 14th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln had died, and apparently Peter Stuyvesant was welcoming Abe into the heavenly firmament. Now, there's a lot of stories that are involved with him. 1930s, a young pastor was preaching, and he noticed a young man always sitting in the same spot, staring very intently, not at him, but past him. So after a while, his curiosity got the better of him. He approached the man and said, well, I'm just curious, how come you're always looking so intently when I'm doing my preaching? Well, he said, when you start preaching, I noticed that there's a couple sitting right behind you, and in Dutch period costume, gentleman with a peg leg, the woman in the costume characteristic of the Dutch period in New York, and they're chatting, commenting about your sermon. Then, apparently, good old peg leg had acquired a girlfriend. Now, in 1954, the last descendant of the males that bore the name Stuyvesant died out. The family was so hoity-toity, the last generation didn't get married. And so when they get pushing people, when they were putting the body into the grave over here, or the mausoleum, they could hear quite loudly the peg leg wrapping around. And then thought that would be the end of it, you know, after all, he's dead and buried here. Nope. 10 years ago, they were having Christmas Day celebration. They just finished their prayers. So they begin hearing 99 bottles of rum, 98 bottles of rum. And they rushed in, saw a man in a Dutch period costume, wooden leg, disappear into the woodwork. But that's still not the end of it. Because a woman about 5 years ago, attending services in this church at night, heard the rap of a peg leg behind her, and she ran all the way home. And there are people here that report this church actually rents out some of its property for rooms, for extra income, and people report there are shadows unexplained in their rooms. There's certain parts of the rooms where their pets won't go in unless they're with their pet parents. So good old peg leg Pete is still doing his haunting. The oldest ghost in New York.
Yes.
You can't keep a good ghost down.
All right, we're going to go on to our next destination. All right, we're here at McSorley. Tell us a little bit about its haunted history.
Okay, this is McSorley's. This is the oldest Irish bar in New York City. They claim an established date of 1854. During this time, it's been here at East 7th and what is now called Taras Shevchenko Place. Yes, say it like it's spelled. Right. And this is a very old place indeed. This is an old style bar. You go in, there's still sawdust on the floors. Doesn't look like they've changed the decoration really since they opened up in 1854. One interesting thing you'll see over the bar, you'll see these dust-covered wishbones, these big turkey wishbones covered with dust. And that comes from an old tradition where kids from the neighborhood before they went off to war, they would come here and they would leave a big wishbone, and no one would touch that wishbone until the kid came back. And when he came back safely from the war, he'd break the wishbone, make a wish, and then, of course, buy a round for the house. The wishbones that are there are the ones who didn't come back. There's also an item, though, hanging over the bar, which is a pair of handcuffs. There's a handcuffs that was broken open by none other than Harry Houdini.
Nice.
Now, Harry Houdini was a magician, but he's best known for his escape artistry, and that's the thing. He was a magician who didn't really like the mumbo-jumbo of it. He was a guy who did tricks. You would never know how he did the tricks, but he was doing tricks. When he did the escapes, he wasn't really doing any tricks. I mean, yes, he got out of a straitjacket by dislocating his shoulder, but that's pretty impressive thing to do once you know how the trick's done. And he was an expert at picking locks and getting out, and that's the thing, it would just make it more and more difficult. So he was doing a demonstration here at McSorley's, and they left the handcuffs there as a souvenir. But also, Harry Houdini is a very important figure in the history of the supernatural. Now, there was a movement called Spiritualism. That started after the Civil War. A lot of people lost their loved ones in the Civil War and wanted to find some way to contact them. So spirit mediums started popping up, and they would communicate, usually for a small fee, with their loved ones. Now, Harry Houdini was always skeptical about anything like that, but he had a good friend named Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the creator of Sherlock Holmes, a very rational figure, but he was also a great believer in the supernatural himself, and he was a great believer in spiritualism. Harry Houdini met with a crisis. His mother that had brought him over from Hungary when he was a small boy, and he always took care of her, and she passed away. And he was very, very distraught over this, and he wanted to contact her, and so he thought this might be a way to do it. But the problem is, whenever he went to any of these mediums that were recommended by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, he was a magician, he was a professional. He could see they were all doing tricks and not doing them very well at all. And finally it got to the point where Doyle's wife, who was a medium, said, wait, I think maybe I can do it. And she did some automatic writing, and she wrote out a message that said the words, I forgive you. And that was supposed to be a message from Harry Houdini's mother. And he looked at that and he said, you know, that's interesting, because my mother spoke Hungarian, she spoke German, she spoke Polish, she spoke Yiddish. She didn't know a word of English. And when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle suggested that, well, maybe she took some classes up in heaven, thus ended the long friendship between Harry Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And they really went at each other in public, fighting over spiritualism. At one point, Doyle even suggesting that Harry Houdini was actually a major psychic who was, in his perverse way, frustrating the mediums around him.
But I understand that at the same time, his campaign was not an anti-spiritualism campaign.
No.
He was a believer in the afterlife, but he also believed that up to this point, it had not been proven to him.
Exactly, and that's the thing. He was keeping an open mind himself, and he was going to try an experiment. And the deal he made with his wife said, I am going to try to come back. I am going to try to contact you. And he left her with a code word. Now, he died on, of old days, Halloween. The legend is that he died from being socked in the gut when he wasn't looking, although he died of peritonitis from a burst appendix. It may have been aggravated by that, but it was a couple of weeks after, so it's a little hard to say.
He suffered 2 beatings a couple of weeks before, as I understand it.
Yeah,
the infamous single blow, but he was also attacked in a hotel lobby.
That one I don't know about,
okay.
But yeah, there's always some doubt. There's even the theory that he was poisoned by the spiritualists because they're so frustrated.
Right.
So yeah, we can do the death of Harry Houdini for a while.
Right.
But he did die on Halloween out in Detroit, and I understand they burn fires in Detroit every night in memory of Harry Houdini on Halloween. That's why they do it. He's actually buried over in Queens, and it used to be a big gathering every Halloween to see if Harry Houdini would pop up. They've now kept that area closed off because too many people were showing up. The thing is, years later, a spiritualist named Arthur Ford contacted Miss Houdini, and he said he had contacted Harry Houdini, and he had the word, and the word was believe. And she said, yes, that's the word. And she was very excited about this, although then people point out and say, yeah, but Bess, you told a paper about a year and a half ago that was the word. She had forgotten. She was self-medicating a little at the time. So Arthur Ford said he never read the newspaper, so that's also a point of debate. But we're still waiting for a definitive visit from Harry Houdini.
Awesome. All right, we're going to move on to our next destination.